The lore of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion starts with a powerful spiritual contract known as the sovereignty of the Divine Covenant. Long ago, a pact was made between the first human empress, Saint Alessia, and the dragon god of time, Akatosh. This deal created a magical shield that protects the world of mortals, called Mundus, from the dark and chaotic dimensions known as Oblivion. This represents the lore of the Dragonfires. As long as a ruler from the Septim bloodline sits on the throne and keeps the eternal fires burning in the Temple of the One, the walls between these worlds stay strong. This is the sovereignty of the liminal barrier, a holy fence that keeps the Daedric Princes, powerful, often evil gods, from bringing their armies into the lands of men. The center of this world is the Imperial City, located in the heart of the province of Cyrodiil. The environment here is a display of imperial sovereignty, featuring white marble towers, golden domes, and massive stone walls. At the very center stands the White Gold Tower, a structure built by an ancient race called the Aelids. This tower is more than just a palace. It is the sovereignty of the cosmic anchor, a physical point that holds reality together. The air in the city is usually filled with the sound of market bells and the smell of fresh bread, representing the lore of the Golden Age. However, a feeling of cold dread begins to creep through the streets as the sun sets on the long reign of the Septims. The story moves into the sovereignty of the assassination. A secret cult called the Mythic Dawn has spent years planning to destroy the Septim family. In a series of quick, bloody strikes, they kill the Emperor's sons. Finally, they corner Emperor Uriel Septim VII in the secret tunnels beneath his own palace. This represents the lore of the extinguished flame. The environment of these tunnels, the Imperial Subterrane, is the sovereignty of the hidden threat. It is a dark, damp world of dripping water and mossy stone, a place where the Emperor is no longer a god-king, but a hunted man. This is the sovereignty of the subterranean shadows, where the luxury of the surface is replaced by the cold reality of death. Before he dies, Uriel Septim gives the Amulet of Kings to a prisoner who was in the right place at the right time. This prisoner, the player, becomes the lore of the unlikely savior. The amulet is the physical key to the Dragonfires. It is a vessel of divine souls. This represents the sovereignty of the relic, an item so powerful that only those with the blood of the dragon can wear it. When the Emperor falls, the Dragonfires go out for the first time in centuries. This is the sovereignty of the total darkness. Without the fire, the barrier between worlds shatters, and the lore of the Oblivion crisis begins. The sky over Cyrodiil turns a sickly red, and the air begins to smell of ozone and sulfur, signaling that the gates to hell are opening. The primary threat during this collapse is the sovereignty of the Deadlands. This is the specific realm of Oblivion ruled by Mehrunes Dagon, the Daedric Prince of Destruction. The lore describes Dagon as a giant of 4 arms who wants to reset the world by burning it to the ground. This introduces the lore of the Prince of Change. Dagon believes that Mundus is actually a part of Oblivion that was stolen from him, and he has come to take it back. This represents the sovereignty of the ancient claim. The environment changes instantly near the cities. The grass turns into ash and thorns, and the ground cracks open to reveal rivers of liquid fire. This is the sovereignty of the Daedric infection, where the land itself is being transformed into a nightmare. Inside the Imperial Palace, the leaders of the government, the Elder Council, are in a state of sovereignty of the bureaucratic panic. Without an emperor, there is no one to lead the legions. This represents the lore of the leaderless nation. The environment of the council chambers is a sovereignty of the stagnant order, where old men argue over laws while the world burns outside. This adds a layer of political sovereignty to the crisis. Ryu, or the hero, must find the Emperor's secret son, a priest named Martin Septim, to relight the fires. The lore of the Lost Heir describes Martin as a man who never wanted power, representing the sovereignty of the reluctant hero, a theme that runs through the entire history of Tamriel. The environment of the Grand Temple of the One represents the sovereignty of the empty throne. This is the holy place where the Dragonfires are supposed to burn. Now, it is a cold stone hall filled with the silence of the gods. This represents the lore of the missing divine. The air is heavy with the fear of the people, who gather outside the temple doors, praying for a miracle. The lore of the Dragonless Age is a period of total uncertainty, where the Golden Age is a contract broken by a blade, and the sovereignty of the mortal will is the only shield left. The prisoner must leave the city and travel to the town of Kvatch, where the first great gate has opened. As the part ends, the imperial city is surrounded by a ring of smoke. The lore of the first gate is a moment of total visual terror. The Golden Age is a world of marble about to turn to ash, and the prisoner is the only messenger left to deliver the hope. He watches as a jagged, burning portal tears through the sky over the horizon. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the blood of the Emperor, and the sovereignty of the Oblivion is the final verdict. He grabs his gear and heads into the wilderness, the red moon of Dagon rising behind him. The lore continues with the sovereignty of the First Breach, a catastrophic event that proves the mortal world is no longer safe. The focus shifts to the city of Kvatch, a once proud mountain citadel that now serves as the lore of the fallen stronghold. The environment of Kvatch is a heartbreaking display of desolate sovereignty. Where there were once bustling markets and stone villas, there is now only a smoldering graveyard. The air is thick with the scent of charred timber and sulfur, and the sky above the city has turned a deep, bruised purple. This represents the sovereignty of the Daedric victory, the first time in history that an Oblivion Gate has successfully swallowed a major city whole. At the center of this destruction stands the Oblivion Gate, the physical manifestation of the sovereignty of the Deadlands. The lore describes the gate as a laceration in reality, a jagged archway made of dark, pulsing metal, and filled with a swirling vortex of orange fire. This represents the lore of the dimensional wound. To save the survivors, the hero must perform the sovereignty of the heroic entry, stepping through the portal and into the realm of Maroon's Dagon. The environment inside the gate is the sovereignty of the infernal realm. It is a world of floating obsidian islands, lakes of boiling blood, and spiraling bone towers that reach into a sky of permanent lightning. This represents the lore of the Deadlands, a place where the laws of nature are replaced by the sovereignty of chaos. The primary threat within the Deadlands is the Dremora, the elite warrior caste of the Daedra. This introduces the lore of the immortal soldier. Unlike the mindless scamps or clanfear beasts, the Dremora possess a sovereignty of the dark honor. They are highly intelligent, wearing ebony and Daedric armor that is fused to their very skin. This represents the sovereignty of the infernal forge. The environment they inhabit is a sovereignty of the vertical terror, where narrow bridges with no railings hang over bottomless pits of fire. The lore of the Sigil Keep describes the massive tower at the center of the island. It is a living machine of stone that vibrates with the heartbeat of the prince. The hero must climb this tower, fighting through the sovereignty of the Guardian Kyn, to reach the top. At the peak of the tower lies the Sigil Stone, the object of the sovereignty of the reality anchor. This is a glowing, spinning orb of pure magicka that keeps the portal to the mortal world open. This represents the lore of the sigil extraction. When the hero grabs the stone, the entire island begins to dissolve. The environment becomes a sovereignty of the collapsing reality, as the fires turn to white light and the stone walls turn to dust. This represents the sovereignty of the mortal triumph, the first time a human has closed a gate from the inside. The hero is spit out back into the ruins of Kvatch, holding the sigil stone as a trophy. This represents the lore of the sigil bearer, the only person who knows how to fight back against the apocalypse. Inside the chapel of Akatosh in Kvatch, the hero finds the lore of the hidden king. Among the survivors is Martin Septim, a humble priest who has no idea he is the last son of the emperor. This represents the sovereignty of the secret bloodline. The environment of the chapel is a sovereignty of the desecrated sanctuary, where the statues of the gods have been toppled and the floor is covered in ash and blood. This adds a layer of spiritual sovereignty to the story. Martin represents the lore of the reluctant leader. He is a man of peace who must now become a symbol of war. The air in the chapel is heavy with faith and despair, representing the sovereignty of the choice. Martin must decide to leave his old life behind and embrace the lore of the Septim destiny. The environment of the road to Waynon Priory represents the sovereignty of the refugee. As the hero leads Martin away from the burning city, they pass lines of weeping civilians and abandoned carts. This is the lore of the displaced nation. The landscape of Cyrodiil, once a golden age of green hills, is now a sovereignty of the war zone. New Oblivion Gates are beginning to pop open like blisters on the skin of the earth. This represents the sovereignty of the expanding invasion. The lore of the Waynon Priory describes a quiet, simple place of prayer that is suddenly thrust into the center of the storm. The environment is a sovereignty of the rural peace, soon to be shattered by the steel and shadow of the Mythic Dawn assassins who are hunting the new emperor. The tactical threat at the priory is the Mythic Dawn agent. This introduces the lore of the bound armor. These cultists use forbidden magic to summon armor and weapons directly onto their bodies in a flash of purple light. This represents the sovereignty of the instant warrior. The environment of the priory, the stables, the library, and the small chapel becomes a sovereignty of the ambush. The lore reveals that the cult has infiltrated every city, turning neighbors into killers. This represents the sovereignty of the internal betrayal. Ryu, or the hero, must protect Martin through a rain of fire and arrows, proving that the sovereignty of the blade is the only thing that can keep the sovereignty of the crown alive. The air at the priory after the battle is still and bitter. The amulet of kings has been stolen by the cult, leaving Martin with no way to light the Dragonfires. The lore of the stolen future is the only thing that remains. The Golden Age is a contract held by the enemy, and the sovereignty of the hero is the only hope of getting it back. Martin looks toward the Cloud Ruler Temple, the mountain fortress of the Blades, as the only safe place left. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the Ash of Kvatch, and the sovereignty of the Resistance is the final verdict. He mounts his horse, his face set in stone, as they begin the climb into the Geralt Mountains. As the part ends, the ruins of Kvatch glow like a dying ember on the horizon. The lore of the shattered city is a reminder of what will happen to all of Tamriel if they fail. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the fire, and the sovereignty of the survivor is the only title Martin has left. He looks at his hands, still stained with the soot of his church, and realizes the Golden Age is gone forever. The lore moves from the smoking ruins of the south to the frozen heights of the Geralt Mountains, centering on the sovereignty of the Cloud Ruler Temple. This is the ancient mountain fortress of the Blades, the elite knights dedicated to protecting the Septim bloodline. The environment here is a display of fortified sovereignty, featuring heavy stone walls, Akaviri-style architecture with sweeping curved roofs, and sharp, icy winds that howl through the battlements. This represents the lore of the Dragon Guard. Inside these walls, the air carries the scent of cold pine and sharpened steel. It is a sovereignty of the military discipline, where Martin Septim is finally greeted as the rightful emperor by Grandmaster Joffre. This is the lore of the Sheltered Flame, the last place in Cyrodiil where the air is safe from the reaching claws of the Daedra. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the isolation of the crown. While the rest of the world falls into chaos, the temple remains a silent peak above the storm. This represents the sovereignty of the high ground. However, the lore of the stolen amulet haunts the halls. Without the Amulet of Kings, Martin cannot sit on the throne in the city. This introduces the lore of the incomplete ritual. The environment of the temple library becomes a sovereignty of the scholarly search, as the Blades and Martin pore over ancient scrolls to find the location of the Mythic Dawn's secret base. The air is thick with the dust of history, representing the sovereignty of the forgotten knowledge. They discover that the cult is hiding in a place called the Lake Arius Caverns. To recover the amulet, the hero must perform the sovereignty of the infiltration. This represents the lore of the spy, where the sovereignty of the blade is replaced by the sovereignty of the shadow. The journey leads to the dark, mist-covered shores of Lake Arius. The environment of the caverns is a sovereignty of the subterranean cult. It is a world of red silk banners, torches burning with green fire, and stone altars stained with the blood of sacrifices. This represents the lore of the Mythic Dawn, a society of fanatics who believe that by destroying the world, they will enter a paradise of eternal life. The air is heavy with the droning chant of the cultists, representing the sovereignty of the hive mind. Inside the depths of the shrine, the hero encounters the lore of the Mysterium Xarxes. This is a holy book written by the Prince of Destruction himself, bound in human skin and pulsing with a malicious life. This represents the sovereignty of the forbidden artifact. The environment of the inner sanctum is a sovereignty of the ritual horror, where the cult leader, Mankar Cameron, is seen giving a speech before escaping through a magical portal. This introduces the lore of the Paradise Realm. Cameron takes the Amulet of Kings with him, leaving the hero to face a cave-in and a horde of fanatics. This represents the sovereignty of the desperate escape, where the hero must fight through the choke points of the collapsing tunnel to bring the dark book back to Martin. The environment of the Cloud Ruler Temple Great Hall changes as the hero returns with the book. It shifts from a place of waiting to a sovereignty of the arcane research. Martin, who once studied the dark arts in his youth, realizes he must use the book to open a portal to Cameron's paradise. This represents the lore of the dangerous wisdom. The air in the hall now smells of burning parchment and static electricity, representing the sovereignty of the magical experiment. To open the door, Martin needs 4 ingredients: a Daedric artifact, blood of a divine, a great Welkin stone, and a great sigil stone. This introduces the lore of the Grand Quest, turning the entire province into a sovereignty of the scavenger hunt. The tactical threat in this era is the Cameron Infiltrator. These are high-ranking cultists who have been given Daedric gifts. This introduces the lore of the mythic transformation. During battle, their skin may turn to stone, or they may summon spectral Daedroth to fight by their side. This represents the sovereignty of the enhanced cultist. The environment of the wilderness, the green forests and ancient Ayleid ruins, becomes a sovereignty of the guerrilla war. The lore of the sleeping sleeper agents describes how the cult has agents in every town, waiting for the signal to strike. This represents the sovereignty of the paranoia, where no tavern or road is truly safe. The hero must navigate this sovereignty of the hidden blade to find the ancient artifacts Martin requires. The search for the blood of a divine leads the hero to the ruin of Sankar Tor, the sovereignty of the ancient tomb. The lore here centers on the lore of the Riemann emperors, the rulers who came before the Septims. The environment is a frozen crypt filled with the wailing souls of cursed blades. This represents the sovereignty of the undead honor. The air is ice-cold and smells of ancient linen, representing the sovereignty of the eternal grave. The hero must free the spirits of the 4 ancient blades to reach the armor of Tiber Septim, which still carries the divine blood of the first emperor. The lore of the ghostly knights describes a brotherhood that transcends death, representing the sovereignty of the loyalty. The air in Sankar Tor after the armor is recovered is quiet and peaceful for the first time in centuries. The lore of the holy relic is the only thing that remains. The Golden Age is a contract held by a dead man, and the sovereignty of the hero is the only way to bring it into the light. Martin looks at the blood-stained armor with grim determination, realizing that the Golden Age requires the sacrifice of the past to save the future. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the tomb of Sankar Tor, and the sovereignty of the preparedness is the final verdict. He begins the ritual to open the gate to paradise. As the part ends, the sky over Cloud Ruler Temple turns a vibrant purple. The lore of the Portal of Choice is a moment of total magical energy. The Golden Age is a world about to be invaded by its own past, and the hero is the only anchor left to hold the reality. He watches as the spirit of the dragon begins to swirl around the dark book. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the magic of the stars, and the sovereignty of the heavens is the final verdict. He prepares to step into the glowing portal. The lore moves to the freezing northern city of Bruma, where the sovereignty of the final defense is about to take place. Martin Septim realizes that to get the last item for his ritual, a great sigil stone, he must allow the enemy to open a great gate. This represents the lore of the strategic sacrifice. The environment of Bruma is a display of hardened sovereignty, featuring heavy timber buildings, snow-covered roofs, and stone walls built to withstand the mountain cold. This is the lore of the northern frontier. The air is sharp with the scent of burning pine and incoming snow, representing the sovereignty of the storm. The hero must gather the greatest warriors from every city in the province to stand together in the Battle of Bruma. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the battlefield of fire and ice. As the battle begins outside the city walls, the ground is covered in white snow, but the sky is torn open by the sizzling orange light of the Oblivion Gates. This represents the sovereignty of the clashing worlds. The lore of the Great Gate describes a portal much larger than any seen before, a massive, mechanical maw of twisted metal and screaming souls. From this gate emerges a great siege crawler, a skyscraper-sized machine of war designed to crush the city walls. This represents the sovereignty of the Daedric juggernaut. The air is filled with the thundering sound of metal on stone, representing the sovereignty of the destruction. The hero must perform the sovereignty of the timed incursion. While Martin and the soldiers hold the line in the snow, the hero must run into the Great Gate. This represents the lore of the suicide mission. Inside the Great Gate, the environment is a sovereignty of the industrial hell. Unlike the smaller islands, this part of the Deadlands is a factory of death, with massive grinding gears and pulleys that move the siege crawler forward. The air is a choking cloud of ash and grease, representing the sovereignty of the machine. The hero has only minutes to reach the top of the Worldbreaker Tower before the crawler reaches Bruma. This is the lore of the racing heartbeat, where every second of delay means the death of a city. At the top of the tower, the hero finds the Great Sigil Stone. This is the sovereignty of the ultimate power source. It is a massive, pulsing orb of pure void energy that glows with a blinding light. This represents the lore of the reality key. When the hero grabs the stone, the environment reacts with a catastrophic failure. The siege crawler moans and collapses, and the Great Gate implodes, pulling the hero back into the mortal world just as the city's walls were about to break. This represents the sovereignty of the turning tide. The hero emerges from the smoke, holding the Great Sigil Stone aloft, proving that even the largest machines of the princes can be broken by mortal hands. With all 4 items gathered, Martin opens the sovereignty of the portal to paradise. This is a magical door into Mankar Cameron's personal dimension. The lore describes paradise as a false heaven created using the power of the Mysterium Xarxes. The environment inside the portal is a sovereignty of the Cyrodiil beauty. It is a world of evergreen gardens, crystal-clear streams, and marble statues that never age. This represents the lore of the Gilded Cage. However, beneath the beauty is a sovereignty of the eternal torture. The immortals who live there are actually the cultists who died on Earth. They are hunted for sport by Daedric monsters every day, only to be reborn to suffer again. This is the sovereignty of the cruel irony. The air in paradise is perfumed and sweet, but it carries the scream of the damned. This is the sovereignty of the masked horror. The hero must navigate the lore of the Forbidden Garden, fighting past the savage gardeners, Dremora who tend to the flowers with the same blades they use to execute the blessed. This represents the sovereignty of the Twisted Order. The hero eventually reaches the Karaka Galar, the Palace of the Prophet. The environment here is a sovereignty of the Ayleid Revival, a palace made of luminous stone that floats above the clouds. This represents the lore of the ancient pride. Mankar Cameron waits at the center, believing his world is more real than the one he left behind. The tactical threat is Mankar Cameron himself. This introduces the lore of the mortal god. Cameron has used the Amulet of Kings to change his own internal nature, giving himself the powers of a prince. This represents the sovereignty of the divine theft. During the battle, the environment of the palace shifts and warps to protect him, with glass walls appearing and gravity failing. This is the sovereignty of the master of reality. Ryu, or the hero, must use the sovereignty of the physical truth, striking Cameron with the iron of reality to break his magical shell. The lore of the death of a dreamer describes the moment Cameron falls. As he dies, his paradise begins to flicker and fade like a dying candle. The air in the palace turns cold and gray as the magical world dissolves. The lore of the recovery of the amulet is the only thing that remains. The Golden Age is a contract taken from a corpse, and the sovereignty of the hero is the only way to get back home. The hero grabs the Amulet of Kings from Cameron's neck just as the palace falls into the void. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the ruins of paradise, and the sovereignty of the return is the final verdict. The hero wakes up on the floor of Cloud Ruler Temple, the amulet finally back in the hands of Martin Septim. As the part ends, Martin looks at the amulet with sad eyes. The lore of the final step is a moment of total clarity. The Golden Age is a world about to face its creator, and Martin is the only sacrifice left to seal the deal. He knows they must go to the Imperial City immediately to light the Dragonfires. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the blood of the stars, and the sovereignty of the Akatosh is the final verdict. They begin the final ride to the capital. The lore reaches its peak in the Imperial City, where the sovereignty of the final siege begins. Martin Septim and the hero arrive to find the capital already under attack. This is the lore of the end times. The environment is a display of shattered sovereignty, as the white marble plazas are stained with Daedric blood and Imperial ash. The air is thick with the scent of burning stone and electric magic. This represents the sovereignty of the breaking barrier. As Martin rushes toward the Temple of the One to light the Dragonfires, a massive sky tier opens directly above the city. This introduces the lore of the prince's arrival. Maroon's Dagon himself, a mountain of red flesh and 4 arms, steps onto the mortal plane. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the presence of a god. When Dagon enters the city, the sovereignty of Mundus begins to melt away. The massive stone buildings of the temple district crumble like dry sand under his feet. This represents the sovereignty of the absolute destruction. The lore of the Deadlands Manifest describes how the prince's very existence acts as a radical poison to reality. The air turns into a static heat that makes it hard to breathe, representing the sovereignty of the void. The hero realizes that swords and arrows are useless toys against a Daedric prince in his true form. This is the lore of the mortal helplessness, where the Golden Age is being physically crushed into the dirt. Martin Septim performs the sovereignty of the ultimate decision. He realizes that the Dragonfires are no longer enough. The barrier is too broken. This represents the lore of the divine transformation. Martin takes the Amulet of Kings and smashes it, releasing the souls of 1,000 emperors stored inside. This is the sovereignty of the sacrificial light. The environment reacts with a blinding golden flash that clears the smoke from the city. Martin's body is consumed by the light, and in his place rises the Avatar of Akatosh, a massive, glowing dragon made of pure time and gold. This represents the sovereignty of the God Dragon, the final answer to the Prince of Destruction. The battle between the Avatar and Dagon is the sovereignty of the cosmic clash. The environment is a sovereignty of the mythic battlefield, where the Temple of the One is blown apart by the roar of time. This represents the lore of the cleansing fire. The golden dragon bites into Dagon's throat, and the blood of a prince, a liquid like molten shadow, spills onto the streets. This is the sovereignty of the banishing. The air vibrates with a high-frequency whine, as the Avatar uses the power of the amulet to stitch reality back together. The lore of the final breath describes the moment Dagon is cast back into the abyss, his physical form turning into cold stone before shattering into 1,000,000 pieces. The aftermath of the battle is the sovereignty of the eternal statue. As the Avatar's work is done, the golden light fades, leaving behind a great stone dragon in the center of the ruined temple. This represents the lore of the Silent Guardian. The environment is a sovereignty of the bittersweet victory. The sky returns to its natural blue, and the red mist of Oblivion vanishes. However, the Septim bloodline is gone. This introduces the lore of the Fourth Era, a time where humanity must rule itself without a divine king. The air is clean and quiet, representing the sovereignty of the new beginning. The hero stands alone in the ruins, the only witness to the Golden Age becoming a legend of stone. The tactical threat is now gone, replaced by the sovereignty of the reconstruction. The lore of the Champion of Cyrodiil is the title given to the hero by the Elder Council. This represents the sovereignty of the living history. The environment of the Imperial City, the Market District, and the Arboretum begins to rebuild, but it feels different. This is the lore of the Scarred Land. The people look at the stone dragon with awe and sadness, knowing that the sovereignty of the Dragonfires has been replaced by the sovereignty of Martin's sacrifice. Ryu, or the hero, realizes that the Golden Age was a contract signed in the blood of a priest, and the sovereignty of the mortal world is the final verdict. The air in the city after the funeral is cool and hopeful. The lore of the White Gold Tower remains, but it no longer holds the linchpin of reality. That power now rests in the stone dragon and the will of the people. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the heart of the temple, and the sovereignty of the memory is the only thing that keeps the darkness away. The hero walks out of the city gates, looking at the green hills of Cyrodiil one last time. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the spirit of Akatosh, and the sovereignty of the future is the final verdict. The gates are closed forever. As the part ends, the sun sets behind the White Gold Tower, casting a long shadow over the province. The lore of the end of the Third Era is a moment of total peace. The Golden Age is a world that has found its own feet, and the hero is the only ghost left to tell the tale. He watches as the first star of the Fourth Era appears in the sky. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the light of the dragon, and the sovereignty of the hope is the final verdict. The story of the fires is over. The lore of the crisis on the mainland is followed by the sovereignty of the Shivering Isles, a realm in the center of the Niben Bay. A strange door made of 3 screaming faces has appeared on a small island. This represents the lore of the door to madness. The environment is a display of unstable sovereignty, where the sky looks like liquid silk and the trees grow in impossible spirals. This is the home of Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness. Unlike the fires of the Deadlands, the air here smells of sweet honey and rotting meat. This represents the sovereignty of the split mind, a place divided into 2 halves: Mania, a world of bright colors and giant mushrooms, and Dementia, a dark swamp of gray fog and twisted thorns. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the chaos of choice. To enter the realm, the hero must pass through the sovereignty of the Fringe, a walled area where travelers wait to see if they are mad enough to enter the capital city of New Sheoth. This represents the lore of the Gatekeeper. The environment features a giant iron construct that guards the path, a creature made of fused limbs and magic. This is the sovereignty of the living lock. The air in the Fringe is filled with the sound of laughter and crying, representing the sovereignty of the broken will. The hero must kill the Gatekeeper using magic-tipped arrows to earn the right to walk the path of the Mad God. The hero meets Sheogorath in his palace, a man who represents the sovereignty of the contradiction. He is a king who carries a cane of order, but speaks in riddles of chaos. This introduces the lore of the Grey March. Sheogorath reveals that every era, a force of perfect order, called Jigalag, invades the islands to delete the madness. This represents the sovereignty of the internal war. The environment of the palace is a sovereignty of the glass reality, where one side is golden and grand, and the other is iron and cold. The air is thick with the static of a split soul, representing the sovereignty of the identity. Sheogorath wants the hero to become his champion to stop the coming invasion. The tactical threat in the Isles is the Gnarl, a creature made of walking wood that grows larger when hit with magic. This introduces the lore of the adaptive nature. These monsters protect the root tunnels that connect the islands. This represents the sovereignty of the living environment. The environment of the roots is a sovereignty of the underground pulse, where the walls breathe and the water glows with mind energy. The lore of the Feldu addiction describes a substance that gives the hero high energy, but causes deep pain if they stop using it. This represents the sovereignty of the chemical mind, where the environment itself acts like a drug on the hero's body. The search for a way to stop Jyggalag leads the hero to the sovereignty of Cyrodiil. This is an ancient ruin designed to test the sanity of intruders. The lore here centers on the lore of the Resonator. The environment is a clockwork maze, where the hero can choose to kill enemies with physical traps or drive them insane with mental illusions. This represents the sovereignty of the moral choice. The air is dusty and mechanical, representing the sovereignty of the old logic. The hero must fix the crystals of light to restart the ruin's power. The lore of the Staff of Sheogorath describes a weapon that can freeze time, representing the sovereignty of the divine control. The invasion begins with the lore of the Knights of Order. These are soldiers made of pure crystal who march in perfect lines. This introduces the sovereignty of the stagnant logic. They do not feel pain or fear. They only seek to turn the world into a gray library. The environment of the Isles begins to change into crystal, with obelisks of order stabbing out of the ground like glass knives. This represents the sovereignty of the deletion, where the chaos of life is replaced by the silence of stone. Ryu, or the hero, must use the sovereignty of the creative madness to break the crystals, proving that chaos is the only thing that allows for growth. The climax of the Isles occurs in the sovereignty of the throne room. Sheogorath disappears, turning into Jyggalag himself, his own true form. This is the lore of the eternal curse. The battle takes place in a courtyard of shifting glass, with the hero fighting a god of logic. This is the sovereignty of the final fight. The hero must use the lore of the Mad God's staff to shatter Jyggalag's armor. The lore of the Mantle of Madness is realized when the hero defeats the god. By winning, the hero becomes Sheogorath. The golden age of the mortal hero ends, and the sovereignty of the new Daedric Prince begins. The air in the Isles after the battle is wild and free. The lore of the Lord of the Isles is the title the hero now holds. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the brain of a god, and the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the madness. The hero sits on the throne, looking out at a world they now rule. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the Shivering Sea, and the sovereignty of the mind is the final verdict. The mortal life of the prisoner is gone, replaced by the purple robes of the prince. As the part ends, the three-faced door in the Niben Bay remains, but it is now quiet. The lore of the hero of the Isles is a secret kept by the mists. The Golden Age is a world that has found a new king, and the hero is the only god left to laugh at the dark. He watches as the butterflies of mania fill the sky. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the dreams of the mad, and the sovereignty of the Isles is the final verdict. The change is complete. The lore returns to the shadows of the Imperial City, focusing on the sovereignty of the Grey Fox. While the world faced the fires of Oblivion, a different kind of war was being fought in the alleys. A war for the lore of the unseen. The environment is a display of urban sovereignty, centered in the waterfront district, a poor neighborhood of rotting wooden shacks and foggy docks. This is the home of the Thieves' Guild. The air here smells of salt water and old rope, representing the sovereignty of the underground. The guild is led by a legendary figure known as the Grey Fox, a man who represents the lore of the curse, as no one can remember his face or name once he stops speaking to them. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the verticality of the city. To rise through the guild, the hero must master the sovereignty of the rooftops. This involves navigating the narrow ledges and thatch roofs of the city at night, avoiding the city watch lanterns below. This represents the lore of the Shadow Walker. The environment of the Imperial Watchtowers is a sovereignty of the law, where heavy iron gates and armored guards represent the order that the thieves seek to bypass. The air is filled with the sound of clanking armor, representing the sovereignty of the constant threat. The hero must use quiet boots and lockpicks to move through the city like a ghost. The search for the guild's greatest prize leads to the lore of the Grey Cowl of Nocturnal. This is a magical mask stolen from a Daedric prince. This represents the sovereignty of the stolen identity. The lore reveals that the mask carries a divine curse, the person who wears it is erased from history. This is why no one knows who the Grey Fox is. The environment of the Grey Fox's secret meetings, often in abandoned basements or hidden gardens, is a sovereignty of the mystery. The air is thick with the whispers of secrets, representing the sovereignty of the forgotten. The Grey Fox wants the hero to perform the ultimate heist to break this curse. The target of the heist is the Elder Scroll, located in the heart of the White Gold Tower. This introduces the lore of the impossible theft. The environment of the Imperial Library is a sovereignty of the sacred silence. It is a world of infinite bookshelves, dusty parchment, and blind moth priests who guard the scrolls. This represents the lore of the Elder Scrolls, objects that exist outside of time and contain the past and future of the world. The air is heavy with magic and smells of old paper, representing the sovereignty of the forbidden knowledge. The hero must crawl through the old way, a network of ancient Iliad sewers and clockwork pipes beneath the tower. Inside the Hall of Epics, the hero must solve the sovereignty of the glass key. This is a puzzle involving reflected light and ancient statues. This represents the lore of the Iliad engineering. The environment is a sovereignty of the mechanical mystery, where stone floor plates trigger hidden arrows or rotating walls. This represents the sovereignty of the lethal trap. The hero must use the lore of the Arrow of Extrication to open the final secret door. The air is stagnant and cold, representing the sovereignty of the dead empire. Finally, the hero sits in a priest's chair and tricks the guards into handing over the Elder Scroll itself. The tactical threat in the tower is the Imperial Battle Mage. These are elite casters who use detection magic to find invisible intruders. This introduces the lore of the anti-thief. The environment of the tower interior becomes a sovereignty of the high stakes, where one wrong step triggers a global alarm. This represents the sovereignty of the pursuit. The hero must use invisibility potions and chameleon spells to fade into the stone walls. Ryu, or the hero, realizes that the golden age of the empire is so blind that a single person can steal its most valuable secret from under its nose. This is the sovereignty of the individual over the state. The climax of the heist occurs when the hero returns the scroll to the Grey Fox. This is the sovereignty of the breaking curse. The fox uses the scroll to rewrite history so that the mask no longer erases the wearer's name. The lore of the Count of Anvil is realized when the fox removes the mask and reveals he is actually the lost ruler of a southern city. This represents the sovereignty of the restored honor. The environment of the Anvil Castle changes as the Count returns to his wife, who had forgotten him for years. This is the sovereignty of the emotional truth, where the magic of the scroll fixes a broken life. The air in the Thieves' Guild after the heist is triumphant. The lore of the new Grey Fox is the title given to the hero, who now wears the mask. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the ink of an Elder Scroll, and the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the shadows. The hero stands on a rooftop, the mask hiding their face, looking out over the city. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the night, and the sovereignty of the thief is the final verdict. The law of the empire is strong, but the shadow of the fox is longer. As the part ends, the hero disappears into the midnight fog. The lore of the Ghost of the Waterfront is a story told by every beggar in Cyrodiil. The Golden Age is a world where the poor have a king, and the hero is the only myth left to balance the wealth. He watches as the mourning guard finds the empty shelf in the library. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the silence of the tower, and the sovereignty of the Grey Cowl is the final verdict. The heist is a legend. The lore moves into the darkest corners of Cyrodiil, focusing on the sovereignty of the Dark Brotherhood. While the world outside fought for survival, a secret family of assassins worked for the lore of the Void. The environment is a display of subterranean sovereignty, centered in the Cheydinhal Sanctuary, a hidden bunker located beneath an abandoned house. This is the home of the Black Hand. The air here smells of cold earth and old blood, representing the sovereignty of the death worship. The guild follows the lore of the Night Mother, a spirit who speaks to a leader called the Listener, telling them who must be killed. Every life taken is a gift to Sithis, the god of nothingness. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the intimacy of murder. To rise through the ranks, the hero must master the sovereignty of the contract. This involves killing targets in specific ways to earn bonuses, special items from the lore of the shadow. The environment of the sanctuary is a sovereignty of the macabre family, where assassins share meals and stories in a dining hall of skulls. This represents the lore of the dark bond, where killers treat each other like brothers and sisters. The air is filled with the sound of sharpening daggers, representing the sovereignty of the professional killer. The hero must use poisoned apples and falling chandeliers to make murders look like accidents. The search for a traitor leads to the lore of the purification. The hero is told that the sanctuary has been compromised. This introduces the sovereignty of the cold heart. The environment of the sanctuary becomes a sovereignty of the execution ground. The hero is ordered to kill every person they have lived with for months, the only family they have known. This represents the lore of the ultimate loyalty. The air is thick with the scent of betrayal, representing the sovereignty of the void. One by one, the brothers and sisters are cut down in the dark. The hero realizes that in the Brotherhood, love is a weakness that must be removed with a blade. The hero is promoted to the sovereignty of the Silencer, working directly for a man named Lucien Lachance. This introduces the lore of the Black Hand. The environment of the dead drop locations like hollow trees or underneath bridges is a sovereignty of the secret communication. It is a world of coded notes and hidden gold. This represents the lore of the Faceless Command. However, the environment begins to feel wrong. The targets become more important, and the notes seem angry. The air is heavy with the fear of the unknown, representing the sovereignty of the manipulation. The hero realizes that someone has swapped the orders, and they have been killing the leaders of the Brotherhood themselves. Inside the Applewatch farmhouse, the hero discovers the sovereignty of the gruesome mistake. The remaining members of the Black Hand believe Lucien Lachance is the traitor. The environment is a sovereignty of the brutal justice, where the hero finds Lucien hanging from the ceiling, his body mutilated by his own students. This represents the lore of the false witness. The air is iron-scented and hot, representing the sovereignty of the blood feud. The real traitor, a man named Matthew Bellamont, watches from the shadows, his mind broken by the lore of the dead mother. He blames the Brotherhood for his mother's death and has spent years destroying it from the inside. The tactical threat is the Shadow Scale, a reptilian assassin born under the sign of the Shadow. This introduces the lore of the Argonian assassin. These killers use water-breathing and toxic blood to strike from the sewers and swamps. This represents the sovereignty of the natural predator. The environment of the Cheydinhal sewers becomes a sovereignty of the hunt, where one must look for the glow of yellow eyes in the dark. Ryu, or the hero, realizes that the golden age of the Brotherhood was a house of cards built on a foundation of old grudges. This is the sovereignty of the past over the present. The climax occurs at the sovereignty of the Night Mother's crypt in Bravel. The hero and the survivors go to speak to the spirit of the mother. This is the lore of the final revelation. The environment is a sovereignty of the sacred tomb, a room filled with golden coffins and stone roses. This represents the lore of the unholy spirit. The traitor reveals himself and tries to stab the Night Mother's ghost. The hero must use the sovereignty of the Voidblade to kill the traitor before he can destroy the heart of the guild. The lore of the new listener is realized when the Night Mother chooses the hero to lead the Brotherhood. The air in the crypt after the fight is ancient and dust-filled. The lore of the Listener of the Void is the title the hero now holds. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the blood of the family, and the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the Night. The hero stands before the Night Mother, her whispers filling their mind with the names of those who must die next. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the crypt, and the sovereignty of the death is the final verdict. The secret family is small, but it is now purified. As the part ends, the hero emerges from the lucky old lady statue in Bravel. The lore of the Wraith of the Hand is a shadow that follows the hero everywhere. The Golden Age is a world where no one is safe from the dark, and the hero is the only blade left to serve the Sithis. He watches as the morning sun hits the city walls, knowing he will return to the dark soon. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the silence of the soul, and the sovereignty of the Black Hand is the final verdict. The kill is certain. The lore shifts to the Towers of Learning and the sovereignty of the Mages Guild. While the common folk feared the gates of hell, the scholars of Cyrodiil fought a different battle over the lore of the soul. The environment is a display of academic sovereignty, centered in the arcane university of the Imperial City. This is a walled campus of blue-roof spires, glowing alchemical gardens, and floating books. This represents the lore of the mystical law. The guild is led by Archmage Hannibal Traven, a man who represents the sovereignty of the moral boundary. He has banned the lore of necromancy, the magic of raising the dead, causing a split in the magical world. The air here smells of incense and raw magicka, representing the sovereignty of the mind. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the weight of knowledge. To rise through the guild, the hero must earn recommendations from every local guild hall. This represents the lore of the apprentice's journey. The environment of the Choral Guild Hall or the Laoian Library is a sovereignty of the quiet study, where glass vials bubble with colorful liquids and soul gems pulse with trapped light. This represents the sovereignty of the controlled power. The hero must solve magical problems, such as finding a ring of burden at the bottom of a well or saving a mage trapped in a dream world. The air is filled with the hum of enchantments, representing the sovereignty of the arcane order. The search for the guild's greatest enemy leads to the lore of Mannimarco, the King of Worms. He is a legendary sorcerer who represents the sovereignty of the undeath. Mannimarco has returned to Cyrodiil to destroy the guild and turn everyone into his eternal slaves. This introduces the lore of the Black Soul Gem. Unlike normal soul gems, these dark crystals can trap the souls of people, not just animals. The environment of the necromancer lairs, usually hidden caves or ancient forts, is a sovereignty of the grave. It is a world of bone altars, execution tables, and jars of pickled organs. This represents the sovereignty of the profane. Inside the Brimaic ice caves, the hero encounters the sovereignty of the revenant. This is a ritual where a necromancer uses the light of the necromancer's moon to turn a grand soul gem into a black one. This represents the sovereignty of the corrupted light. The environment is a sovereignty of the ghostly blue, where the air is ice cold and the walls are frosted with death. This introduces the lore of the thrall, where a person's body is forced to walk and fight long after the soul is gone. The hero must stop these rituals to protect the sovereignty of the living soul. The air is heavy with the scent of formaldehyde, representing the sovereignty of the laboratory. The environment of the Arcane University Council Chamber changes as the war gets worse. It shifts from a place of research to a sovereignty of the desperate siege. Archmage Traven realizes that Mannimarco's power is too great to be stopped by normal spells. This represents the lore of the Archmage's sacrifice. Traven decides to trap his own soul within a colossal soul gem to create a shield for the hero. This is the sovereignty of the final gift. The air in the chamber now smells of burning spirit and ozone, representing the sovereignty of the transmutation. The hero must take this gem and travel to the Echo Cave to face the King of Worms himself. The tactical threat is the Lich, a mage who has turned themselves into an undead monster to gain infinite power. This introduces the lore of the undead sorcerer. These creatures use Reflect spell and summon Zivali to overwhelm their enemies. This represents the sovereignty of the ancient malice. The environment of Echo Cave becomes a sovereignty of the end stage, where the ground is covered in shattered coffins and the water is black and oily. Ryu, or the hero, realizes that the golden age of magic is a high-wire act over an abyss of darkness. This is the sovereignty of the responsibility, where great power requires great restraint. The climax occurs at the sovereignty of the Throne of Bones. Mannimarco waits for the hero, believing he can easily harvest their soul. This is the lore of the King of Worms. The battle is a sovereignty of the arcane duel, with fireballs and lightning bolts, tearing the cave walls apart. This is the sovereignty of the final exam. Because of Traven's sacrifice, the hero is immune to Mannimarco's death magic. The hero must use the sovereignty of the physical force to strike down the wizard. The lore of the new Archmage is realized when Mannimarco falls, his body turning into gray ash. The air in the university after the war is clear and bright. The lore of the Archmage of Cyrodiil is the title the hero now holds. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the spirit of the teacher, and the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the wisdom. The hero stands atop the Imperial Observatory, the stars reflecting in the glass domes. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the light of the stars, and the sovereignty of the magic is the final verdict. The dead are back in their graves, and the library is open. As the part ends, the blue glow of the university gates shines in the night. The lore of the Master of the Elements is a story of a student who became a savior. The Golden Age is a world where knowledge is the shield, and the hero is the only scholar left to guard the gates. He watches as the morning sun hits the white gold tower. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the ink of the soul, and the sovereignty of the Mages Guild is the final verdict. The lesson is learned. The lore shifts from the magical towers to the mud and steel of the sovereignty of the Fighters Guild. While mages studied stars, the mercenaries of Cyrodiil fought a brutal war over the lore of the contract. The environment is a display of mercenary sovereignty, centered in the guild halls of Coral and Leowian. These are buildings filled with the scent of oil, leather, and dried sweat. This represents the sovereignty of the hired sword. The guild is led by Vilena Daunton, but the real threat comes from a new rival, the Blackwood Company. This group represents the sovereignty of the ruthless competition, a faction of warriors who seem to have superhuman strength and no fear of death. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the corruption of the warrior. To rise in the guild, the hero must complete contracts that reveal how the Blackwood Company is stealing all the work. This represents the lore of the dying trade. The environment of the Blackwood Company Hall in Leowian is a sovereignty of the foreign power. It is decorated with strange trophies from the swamps of Black Marsh. This represents the sovereignty of the outsider. The air in their hall is thick with a sweet, heavy musk, representing the sovereignty of the hidden drug. The hero must discover why these rivals are so much faster and stronger than normal men. The search for the truth leads to the lore of the Hist sap. The Hist are ancient, sentient trees from the Argonian homeland. This introduces the sovereignty of the stolen soul. The Blackwood Company has smuggled a sickly Hist tree into their basement and is milking its sap. This represents the sovereignty of the biological weapon. When a warrior drinks this sap, they enter a primal rage. The environment of the company basement is a sovereignty of the living nightmare, where the walls are covered in pulsing roots and the air smells of rotten sugar. This is the sovereignty of the forced evolution, where nature is tortured to create soldiers. The hero must perform the sovereignty of the infiltration. To get the proof, the hero pretends to join the Blackwood Company. This represents the lore of the undercover mission. They are given a cup of the sap before a mission to the village of Water's Edge. The environment suddenly changes. Under the influence of the sap, the hero sees the village filled with goblin monsters. This is the sovereignty of the hallucination. The air feels electric and red, representing the sovereignty of the bloodlust. The hero kills every goblin in sight, only to wake up the next morning and realize they have murdered the innocent farmers of the village. This represents the sovereignty of the regret. The environment of the Fighters Guild Hall becomes a sovereignty of the final justice. Modern Orion, a high-ranking member, realizes that the guild must destroy the Blackwood Company to save its honor. This represents the lore of the internal cleaning. The hero is sent on a search and destroy mission to the company's main base. This is the sovereignty of the final contract. The air in the streets of Leowian is quiet and tense, representing the sovereignty of the siege. The hero must fight through drug-crazed warriors who no longer feel pain. This is the sovereignty of the flesh over the spirit. The tactical threat is the sap addict. This introduces the lore of the Berserker. These enemies have infinite stamina and will attack until their bodies literally fall apart. This represents the sovereignty of the unstoppable force. The environment of the Blackwood Hall becomes a sovereignty of the slaughterhouse, where the floors are slippery with sap and blood. Ryu, or the hero, must use the sovereignty of the tactical patience, letting the enemies tire themselves out before striking. This is the sovereignty of the discipline, proving that a true warrior does not need a bottle to find their strength. The climax occurs at the sovereignty of the sickly hiss tree. The hero finds the leader of the company, Rizakar, guarding the tree. This is the lore of the greed. The battle is a sovereignty of the heavy steel, with clashing swords echoing through the basement. This is the sovereignty of the final blow. After killing the leader, the hero must use loose pipes to jam the extraction machinery, causing the hiss tree to scream and die. The lore of the guild master is realized when the Blackwood Company collapses, their fake strength vanishing as the tree burns. The air in the guild hall after the war is fresh and clean. The lore of the Master of the Fighters Guild is the title the hero now holds. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the sweat of the honest. And the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the honor. The hero stands in the courtyard, their armor cleaned of the blue sap. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the strength of the arm, and the sovereignty of the warrior is the final verdict. The rivals are gone, and the guild's name is restored. As the part ends, the sun shines on the shields of the guild. The lore of the Shield of Cyrodiil is a story of a mercenary who chose the hard path. The Golden Age is a world where strength is tempered by law, and the hero is the only sentry left to defend the weak. He watches as the Morning Guard replaces the company mercenaries on the walls. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the iron of the heart, and the sovereignty of the Fighters Guild is the final verdict. The fight is won. The lore moves to the blood-stained sands of the Imperial City Arena, the sovereignty of the public spectacle. While the guilds fought for secrets and coin, the arena offered the lore of the glory. The environment is a display of brutal sovereignty, a massive stone circle where the only law is kill or be killed. This represents the sovereignty of the crowd, as thousands of citizens gather daily to watch the blue team and yellow team tear each other apart. The air here smells of iron-scented blood, hot sand, and cheap wine. This is the lore of the combatant, where a prisoner can rise from a pit dog to a grand champion through the sheer sovereignty of the blade. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the desensitization of the people. The arena serves as a pressure valve for the Empire, distracting the populace from the Oblivion crisis. This represents the sovereignty of the bread and circuses. The environment of the Bloodworks, the underground tunnels where fighters prepare, is a sovereignty of the tense silence. It is a world of cold stone benches, first aid bandages, and the clank of heavy gates. This represents the lore of the gladiator. The air is filled with the muffled roar of the crowd from above, representing the sovereignty of the judgment. The hero must survive waves of pit fighters, boars, and trolls to prove their worth. The search for the ultimate challenge leads to the lore of Agranak Gromalog, known as the Grey Prince. He is the current Grand Champion, a massive orc who represents the sovereignty of the undefeated. Agranak is unlike other fighters. He is faster and stronger than any orc should be. This introduces the lore of the half-blood. Agranak believes he is of noble birth and asks the hero to find proof of his great heritage. The journey leads to the sovereignty of Crowhaven, an abandoned ruin. The environment is a sovereignty of the Gothic horror, a place of cobwebs and dust that holds a dark secret. Agranak's father was not a lord, but a vampire lord who lived in the shadows. The hero finds the journal of Lord Leviticus, which reveals the sovereignty of the accursed blood. This represents the lore of the monstrous origin. When the hero brings this news to the Grey Prince, the environment of the Bloodworks changes. The confidence of the champion shatters, replaced by a sovereignty of the self-loathing. Agranak realizes he is a spawn of evil, and his world collapses. This represents the lore of the identity crisis. The air in his training room becomes heavy with grief, representing the sovereignty of the broken spirit. He no longer wants to be a hero. He wants the silence of the grave. The final battle is the sovereignty of the empty victory. The hero enters the arena for the title of Grand Champion. The environment is at its peak of sovereignty of the spectacle, with petals falling from the sky and the crowd screaming for blood. This represents the lore of the final duel. However, the Grey Prince refuses to fight. He stands in the center of the sand, his arms at his sides, begging the hero to end his life. This is the sovereignty of the mercy kill. The hero must strike down a man who will not defend himself. This represents the lore of the Hollow Fame, proving that the sovereignty of the arena is built on a foundation of tragedy and lies. The tactical threat in the higher ranks is the arena champion. These fighters use reflect damage and magical shields to turn the hero's strength against them. This introduces the lore of the tactical fighter. The environment of the arena pit becomes a sovereignty of the hazard, where pillars of fire or spike traps can emerge from the floor. This represents the sovereignty of the random death. Ryu, or the hero, must use the sovereignty of the environmental awareness, pushing enemies into the traps they intended for him. This is the sovereignty of the survivor, where the smartest fighter, not just the strongest, takes the crown. The climax occurs when the hero is crowned the sovereignty of the Grand Champion. The Arena Master gives the hero the raiment of valor, a suit of enchanted armor. This is the lore of the hero's reward. The environment of the arena is a sovereignty of the golden light, as the sun hits the hero's blade. But the hero is followed by the adoring fan, a young boy who represents the sovereignty of the annoyance. This introduces the lore of the celebrity, where every movement is watched and every victory is cheapened by the shadow of fame. The air in the arena is sweet with success, but it tastes like dust and ash. The air in the bloodworks after the final fight is quiet and empty. The lore of the Grand Champion of the Imperial City is the title the hero now holds. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the sand of the arena, and the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the legend. The hero stands in the center of the circle, the blood of the Grey Prince still on their boots. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the death of a friend, and the sovereignty of the fame is the final verdict. The crowd is happy, but the hero is alone. As the part ends, the gates of the arena close for the night. The lore of the Champion's Rest is a story of a warrior who found nothing at the top. The Golden Age is a world where the people cheer for death, and the hero is the only icon left to carry the weight. He watches as the moon rises over the white gold tower, casting a shadow over the sand. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the silence of the crowd, and the sovereignty of the arena is the final verdict. The title is yours. The lore moves to the ruins of the Priory of the Nine, focusing on the sovereignty of the divine restoration. While the world faced the modern threat of the Deadlands, an ancient evil from the First Era returned, Uriel the Unfeathered. This represents the lore of the immortal Iliad. Uriel is a sorcerer king who has returned from the spirit world to destroy the Church of the Nine and reclaim the land for his long-dead race. The environment is a display of holy sovereignty, centered on the forgotten chapels of the gods. The air here smells of cold stone, fresh incense, and ancient magic. This is the lore of the Crusader, where a hero must find the 8 relics of Pelennor Whitestrake to become the sovereignty of the Holy Knight. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the pilgrimage of the penitent. To begin the quest, the hero must walk the Way of the Nine, visiting wayside shrines scattered across the wilderness. This represents the sovereignty of the humble spirit. The environment of the shrines is a sovereignty of the natural peace, often located on quiet hillsides or deep within forests. This represents the lore of the penance. The air is filled with the sound of wind through the leaves, representing the sovereignty of the divine silence. By praying at these shrines, the hero's infamy is washed away, proving they have the sovereignty of the pure heart required to wear the holy armor. The search for the relics leads to the lore of Pelennor Whitestrake, the original divine crusader. This introduces the sovereignty of the relic quest. Each piece of armor is hidden in a place that tests a specific virtue. The environment of Vanua, an underwater Iliad ruin, holds the helm of the Crusader. This is a sovereignty of the submerged past, where the air is replaced by cold, heavy water, and the walls are slippery with algae. This represents the lore of the endurance. The hero must recover the cuirass from the Priory of the Nine, which is guarded by the ghosts of the knights. This is the sovereignty of the haunted honor, where the hero must duel the spirits of the past to prove they are the true heir. The hero must rebuild the sovereignty of the Order of the Nine. This involves recruiting new knights to live at the Priory and train for the final battle. This represents the lore of the Brotherhood of Light. The environment of the Priory changes from a ruined shell to a sovereignty of the living fortress. The holes in the roof are patched, the statues of the knights are cleaned, and the training yard rings with the sound of practice. This represents the sovereignty of the hope reborn. The air in the Priory becomes warm and bright, representing the sovereignty of the purpose. The hero is no longer just a warrior. They are a sovereignty of the leader, commanding a holy army against the dark. The tactical threat is the Auroran, the golden-armored servants of the Daedric Prince Meridia. This introduces the lore of the Light Soldier. These warriors use shock magic and great axes to strike with the speed of a thunderbolt. This represents the sovereignty of the blinding force. The environment of the chapels of the cities, like the Chapel of Dibella in Anvil, becomes a sovereignty of the war zone. The lore of the desecration describes how the Aurorans kill the priests and smash the altars, leaving the holy places in ruins. Ryu, or the hero, must use the sovereignty of the holy wrath, using the relics of the Crusader to deflect the Aurorans' light and strike them down. Inside the Garlos Malater, the hero finds the sovereignty of the Dark Core. This is the fortress where Uriel is gathering his strength. The lore describes it as a place of infinite light that feels cold as ice. This represents the sovereignty of the Iliad majesty. The environment is a sovereignty of the timeless geometry, where the walls are made of crystal and white stone. The hero must use the lore of the blessing of Talos to reach Uriel. This blessing allows the hero to step outside of time, pursuing Uriel's soul into the spirit realm after his physical body is destroyed. This represents the sovereignty of the dual victory, where the enemy must be killed in both the world of flesh and the world of spirit. The climax occurs in the sovereignty of the sky battle. After defeating Uriel's body, the hero's soul is projected into the clouds over the imperial city. This is the lore of the final duel. The battle takes place on a platform of light high above the world. This is the sovereignty of the celestial conflict. The hero must use the sovereignty of the Crusader's sword to shatter Uriel's spirit forever. The lore of the Uriel's end is realized when the Iliad king vanishes into white dust, never to return. The hero falls back to earth, landing in the Priory, alive through the sovereignty of the divine mercy. The air in the Priory after the war is pure and sacred. The lore of the Divine Crusader of the Nine is the title the hero now holds. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the light of the heavens, and the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the saint. The hero stands before the statue of Pelinal, the holy relics glowing with a soft, blue light. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the spirit of the gods, and the sovereignty of the faith is the final verdict. The ancient evil is gone, and the church is safe. As the part ends, the sun hits the armor of the Crusader on its stand. The lore of the Knight of the Nine is a story of a warrior who found peace in the service of the gods. The Golden Age is a world where the light always returns, and the hero is the only guardian left to protect the altars. He watches as the new knights take their oaths of loyalty. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the silence of the Priory, and the sovereignty of the Nine is the final verdict. The crusade is over. The lore shifts from the grand wars of gods and kings to the sovereignty of the strange and unusual. Beyond the main gates and holy temples lie the smaller, more personal stories that make up the lore of the Cyrodiilic countryside. These are the side quests, which represent the sovereignty of the unexpected. The environment is a display of eclectic sovereignty, featuring isolated farmsteads, hidden valleys, and cursed villages. This is the lore of the local legend, where a simple walk through the great forest can lead to a world made of oil paint or a town hiding a dark god in its basement. The air in these places smells of mystery and old earth, representing the sovereignty of the secret. The first major environmental theme is the world within the canvas. In the city of Cyrodiil, a painter named Uriel Septim has been trapped inside his own creation. This represents the sovereignty of the artistic reality. The hero enters the painted world, using the lore of the brush of true paint. The environment here is a sovereignty of the brushstroke, where the sky is a canvas of swirling colors, and the trees look like splotches of green pigment. This represents the lore of the two-dimensional life. The air is thick with the scent of turpentine and linseed oil, representing the sovereignty of the studio. The hero must fight painted trolls that drop turpentine fat to escape this beautiful but lethal trap. The second theme is the shadow over Hackdirt. This is the sovereignty of the insular cult, located in a small, decaying village in the woods. The lore here centers on the lore of the Deep Ones, mysterious entities that live underground. The environment is a sovereignty of the creeping rot, featuring boarded-up windows, hostile locals, and a church with no crosses. This represents the sovereignty of the forbidden faith. The hero must navigate the Hackdirt Caverns, a network of tunnels beneath the houses where the air is damp and stagnant, representing the sovereignty of the subterranean terror. The hero must rescue a kidnapped girl before she is gifted to the things in the dark. The search for the sovereignty of the lost leads to the lore of the collector. In the Imperial City, a man named Umbacano seeks Aeolid statues from the ruins scattered across the land. This introduces the sovereignty of the archaeological greed. The environment of the Aeolid ruins, like Miskarkand or Fanakasikal, is a sovereignty of the ancient white stone. It is a world of blue Welkin lights, crushing ceiling traps, and lethal blade pendulums. This represents the lore of the wild elves. The air is stale and ancient, representing the sovereignty of the dead era. Umbacano wants to use these relics to reclaim the past, representing the sovereignty of the dangerous nostalgia. Shutterstock the hero encounters the sovereignty of the paranoia in the town of Skingrad. A man named Glartir believes everyone is spying on him. This represents the lore of the mental collapse. The environment of the Skingrad alleys at midnight is a sovereignty of the suspicion, where every shadow on the wall and creak of a gate feels like an attack. This represents the sovereignty of the unreliable narrator. The hero is asked to watch the spies, leading to a moral sovereignty of the choice. Do you tell Glartir the truth and face his anger, or do you play along with his madness? The air is cold and tense, representing the sovereignty of the fear. The tactical threat in these stories is the Will-o'-the-Wisp, a glowing orb of light that drains the hero's magic and health. This introduces the lore of the deceptive light. These entities haunt the swamps and ruins, representing the sovereignty of the natural trap. The environment of the Blackwood swamps becomes a sovereignty of the fog, where one can easily lose their way while following the false glow of the wisp. Ryu, or the hero, must use the sovereignty of the magical resistance, using silver weapons or spells to strike the formless enemy. This is the sovereignty of the sharp eye, proving that not everything that glows is a friend. The climax of these smaller tales often occurs in the sovereignty of the personal revelation. Whether it is finding the lost twins of Coral or solving the mystery of the ghost ship of Anvil, the hero learns the lore of the human heart. The environment of these conclusions is often a sovereignty of the simple truth. A mother is reunited with her sons, or a ghost is finally put to rest. This represents the sovereignty of the small victory, which is just as important to the people of Cyrodiil as the closing of an Oblivion Gate. The air in these moments is light and relieved, representing the sovereignty of the closure. The air in the painted world, after the trolls are defeated, is still and beautiful. The lore of the hero of the people is the title the hero earns through these deeds. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the help of a stranger, And the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the kind heart. The hero stands on a hill overlooking a small farm they just saved from goblins. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the small things. And the sovereignty of the community is the final verdict. The world is made of more than just kings and demons. As the part ends, the sun sets over a quiet village. The lore of the Guardian of the Crossroads is a story of a traveler who took the time to listen. The Golden Age is a world where everyone has a story, and the hero is the only listener left to heal the wounds. He watches as the lanterns are lit in the windows of a town that is now safe. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the kindness of the road, and the sovereignty of the side quest is the final verdict. The journey continues. The lore turns toward the wild and lonely places of Cyrodiil, focusing on the sovereignty of the Daedric shrines. While the Septim Empire worshipped the 9 divines in grand cathedrals, the lore of the princes was kept alive at stone altars hidden deep in the forests and high on the mountains. These shrines represent the sovereignty of the ancient power, places where the barrier between the mortal world and the outer planes is thin. The environment is a display of primal sovereignty, featuring massive statues of the 15 Daedric lords, often surrounded by fanatical followers and offerings of flesh and wine. This is the lore of the Dark Bargain, where a hero can speak directly to a god in exchange for a task that often tests their soul. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the temptation of the artifact. Each Daedric prince offers a reward from the lore of the unholy relics, items of impossible power that do not belong in the mortal world. This represents the sovereignty of the greed. The environment of Azura's shrine in the Gerald Mountains is a sovereignty of the twilight, where the air is thin and cold, and the statue of the Rose Mother watches the horizon. The lore of the Azura's star describes an infinite soul gem that never breaks, representing the sovereignty of the eternal energy. The air here smells of frozen lilies and ozone, representing the sovereignty of the prophecy. The second theme is the cruelty of the prince. The tasks given by the Daedra are often a sovereignty of the moral test. For example, the Prince of Lies, Bothia, requires the hero to fight in a tournament of 10 bloods. This represents the lore of the survival of the fittest. The environment of the tournament plane is a sovereignty of the Red Mist, a series of floating islands where the air is salty with the scent of blood. This is the sovereignty of the arena of the void. The hero must kill a champion of every race to prove their might, earning the Gold Brand, a sword that burns with hellfire. This represents the sovereignty of the lethal reward, where power is bought with the lives of others. The search for the sovereignty of the mind leads to the shrine of Hermias Mora, the Prince of Knowledge and Memory. This introduces the sovereignty of the Forbidden Library. The shrine is located in a deep forest crevice, where the sun never reaches. The lore here centers on the lore of the Agma Infinium, a book of ancient secrets that can change a person's very nature. This represents the sovereignty of the ultimate evolution. The environment of the shrine is a sovereignty of the abyssal silence, where the air is damp and heavy with the weight of thought. The hero must collect a soul of every race to unlock the book. This is the sovereignty of the biological record, proving that to the princes, mortals are just specimens in a jar. The environment of the Shrine of Sheogorath represents the sovereignty of the absurdity. The Prince of Madness asks the hero to fulfill a prophecy of doom in a small, peaceful village called Border Watch. This represents the lore of the Kshara prophecy. The hero must use smelly cheese to attract a plague of rats and rain dogs from the sky. This is the sovereignty of the chaotic will, where the environment is manipulated just for a laugh of a god. The air in the village turns from fresh hay to rotting meat, representing the sovereignty of the mad logic. The reward is the Wabajak, a staff that randomly transforms enemies into chickens or Draymora. The tactical threat at these shrines is the Daedric Guardian. These are monsters like the Spider Daedra or the Zivali that represent the sovereignty of the alien life. They use paralysis spells and magic reflection to protect the holy sites. This represents the sovereignty of the supernatural guard. The environment around the shrines becomes a sovereignty of the danger zone, where the wildlife is more aggressive and the weather is always stormy. Ryu, or the hero, must use the sovereignty of the elemental weakness, using frost against fire Daedra or shock against the armored ones. This is the sovereignty of the scholar warrior, knowing that every god has a chink in their armor. The climax of the Daedric quests occurs at the sovereignty of the final offering. After completing all 15 tasks, the hero stands as the lore of the champion of the princes. The environment of the shrines is now a sovereignty of the recognition, where the stone statues whisper the hero's name. This represents the sovereignty of the dark legend. The hero carries a bag of relics, the skeleton key, the mace of Molag Bal, and the ebony mail. These items represent the sovereignty of the master of all, a person who has taken the best and worst of what the gods have to offer. The air is vibrating with power, representing the sovereignty of the ascension. The air at the final shrine is quiet and tense. The lore of the favorite of the Daedra is the title the hero now holds. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the shadow of the gods, and the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the artifact. The hero stands on a mountain peak, the Agma Infinium, in their hands, feeling their strength, speed, and mind expand beyond human limits. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the service of the dark, and the sovereignty of the power is the final verdict. The gods are satisfied, but the hero's soul is marked. As the part ends, the stone eyes of the statues seem to follow the hero as they walk away. The lore of the Prince's Pawn is a story of a warrior who traded peace for power. The Golden Age is a world where the gods are always watching, and the hero is the only vessel left to carry the burden. He watches as the sun sets behind a Daedric statue, casting a clawed shadow over the land. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the silence of the shrine, and the sovereignty of the Daedra is the final verdict. The bargain is struck. The lore of the journey concludes with the sovereignty of the final legacy. After the gates are closed, the mad gods are satiated, and the guilds are restored, the world of Cyrodiil enters the lore of the Fourth Era. The environment is a display of restored sovereignty, but it is a landscape changed forever by the scars of the invasion. This represents the sovereignty of the new normal. The Imperial City remains the heart of the continent, but the white gold tower no longer glows with the divine protection of the Septims. Instead, the air is filled with the sovereignty of the mortal responsibility, as the people realize that the golden age of God Kings is over. The air smells of rain on warm stone and new growth, representing the sovereignty of the survival. The primary environmental theme of this final chapter is the weight of the stone dragon. In the center of the ruined Temple of the One stands the sovereignty of the Avatar's ghost. The statue of the golden dragon, created from Martin Septim's sacrifice, is the lore of the eternal shield. This environment is a sovereignty of the sacred memory, where citizens come from across Tamriel to lay flowers and light small candles at the base of the stone. This represents the lore of the missing emperor. The air in the temple district is quiet and holy, representing the sovereignty of the peace that was bought with blood. The hero stands before the statue, realizing they are the last living link to the dynasty that began with Tiber Septim. The second theme is the disappearance of the champion. The lore describes the final fate of the hero as the sovereignty of the vanishing legend. Having achieved everything, becoming the Grey Fox, the Listener, the Archmage, and the Mad God, the hero no longer fits in the normal world. This represents the lore of the transcendent warrior. The environment of the hero's home, whether a shack in the waterfront or the grand Rosethorn Hall, becomes a sovereignty of the empty nest. The air is still and dusty, filled with the trophies of 100 quests that no one else can understand. This is the sovereignty of the hero's solitude, the price paid for carrying the weight of the world on one's shoulders. The search for the final meaning leads to the sovereignty of the historian. In the years that follow, the Elder Council writes the lore of the Oblivion crisis into the history books. They name the prisoner the champion of Cyrodiil, a title that represents the sovereignty of the nameless honor. The environment of the Imperial Archives is a sovereignty of the written truth, where ink and parchment turn the hero's life into a myth. This introduces the lore of the fading memory. As the years turn into decades, the people begin to forget the scream of the scamps and the heat of the gates, remembering only the peace of the dragon. The air is dry and paper-scented, representing the sovereignty of the archive. The environment of the Cyrodiilic wilderness represents the sovereignty of the natural erasure. Nature begins to reclaim the places where the Oblivion Gates once stood. This is the lore of the earth's healing. The charred ground is covered by wildflowers, and the broken stones are hidden by vines and moss. This represents the sovereignty of the time. The hero walks through the great forest, seeing a world that no longer looks like a war zone. The air is sweet and cool, representing the sovereignty of the restoration. Ryu, or the hero, realizes that the Golden Age was not a place, but a moment of courage that allowed the world to keep turning. This is the sovereignty of the cycle. The tactical threat is now gone, replaced by the sovereignty of the internal peace. The lore of the warrior's rest describes the hero setting down their blade for the last time. This represents the sovereignty of the finished task. The environment of the Cloud Ruler Temple becomes a sovereignty of the Quiet Watch, where the few remaining blades guard a legacy that has no king. This is the lore of the sunset. Ryu, or the hero, looks at the dragon sword or the gold brand and realizes they are no longer needed. The sovereignty of the peace is so complete that the hero has become an anachronism, a person out of time. This is the sovereignty of the final sheathing. The climax of the entire 15-part journey is the sovereignty of the final horizon. The hero travels to the Gold Coast at sunset. This is the lore of the journey's end. The environment is a sovereignty of the infinite sea, where the orange sun meets the blue water. This represents the sovereignty of the mystery. Some say the hero sailed to the Shivering Isles to rule as a god. Others say they simply walked into the waves to find the next adventure. The lore of the hero of the Third Era is realized in this moment of total freedom. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the silence of the waves, and the sovereignty of the spirit is the final verdict. The air on the coast is salty and free. The lore of the champion's legacy is the only thing that remains. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the hearts of the people, and the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the inspiration. The hero leaves their boots on the sand, a final sign that they are no longer a prisoner of fate. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the light of the new moon, and the sovereignty of the future is the final verdict. The gates are shut, the gods are silent, and the world belongs to the mortals now. As the part ends, the camera pans back from the coast, showing the map of Cyrodiil one last time. The lore of the Oblivion legend is complete. The Golden Age is a world that has found its own path, and the hero is the only ghost left to guard the dream. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the soul of Tamriel, and the sovereignty of the legend is the final verdict. The story is told. The lore of the journey is built upon the sovereignty of the attribute system, the invisible framework that governs the lore of the hero's growth. Unlike other realms, this world operates on the sovereignty of the 7 pillars: strength, intelligence, willpower, agility, speed, endurance, and luck. This represents the lore of the internal potential. The environment of the character sheet is a sovereignty of the self-analysis, where every action, from jumping over a fence to swinging a mace, contributes to the sovereignty of the skill increase. This is the lore of the practical evolution, where a hero does not simply level up by existing, but by doing. The air of this system is mathematical and precise, representing the sovereignty of the effort. The primary environmental theme of this chapter is the efficiency of action. To master the world, the hero must understand the sovereignty of the major skills. This represents the lore of the chosen path. The environment of the level up screen is a sovereignty of the quiet reflection, occurring only when the hero rests in a bed. This represents the lore of the restful insight. During this moment, the sovereignty of the multipliers is revealed, showing how much the hero has improved in their specific fields. This is the sovereignty of the discipline, where the hero must balance their training to maximize their bonus points. The air in the dream state of leveling is weightless and infinite, representing the sovereignty of the potential. The second theme is the sovereignty of the infinite craft. This focuses on the lore of alchemy, enchanting, and spellmaking. The environment of the alchemical mortar and pestle is a sovereignty of the discovery, where mixing flax seeds and steel blue entoloma can create a potion of restoration. This represents the lore of the natural synergy. The sovereignty of the spell-making altar in the Arcane University allows the hero to combine effects, creating a lore of the custom art. One can create a spell that burns, freezes, and shocks at the same time. This represents the sovereignty of the creative will, where the laws of magic are suggestions to be rewritten by the master. The tactical threat within the mechanics is the sovereignty of the level scaling. This introduces the lore of the growing world. As the hero becomes stronger, the environment reacts by making the enemies equally dangerous. A simple bandit who once wore rags will eventually appear in full glass armor. This represents the sovereignty of the constant challenge. This system ensures that the sovereignty of the danger never fades, but it also creates the lore of the paradox, where a high-level hero might struggle against a highwayman more than they did against a Daedric lord. Ryu, or the hero, must use the sovereignty of the strategic gearing, finding unique artifacts that sit outside the scaling system to maintain their edge. The air in the inventory menu is frozen and timeless. The lore of the perfect build is the goal of every traveler. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the numbers of the soul, and the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the optimization. The hero stands in the middle of a forest, checking their fatigue bar and magicka reserve before a fight. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the precision of the strike, and the sovereignty of the system is the final verdict. The math is the true god of this world. Beyond the numbers lies the sovereignty of the persuasion wheel. This system governs the lore of the social interaction. The environment of a conversation is a sovereignty of the minigame, where the hero must admire, joke, coerce, or boast to gain the favor of a stranger. This represents the sovereignty of the charisma. The air during these moments is tense and shifting, as the NPC's face changes from a scowl to a smile based on the hero's speed and timing. This is the lore of the Silver Tongue, where a battle can be won with words before a blade is even drawn. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the rapport of the people, and the sovereignty of the speechcraft is the final verdict. The final mechanic is the sovereignty of the birth sign. At the start of the journey, the hero is marked by the stars. This represents the lore of the celestial fate. Whether born under the warrior, the mage, or the thief, the hero receives a permanent blessing. This is the sovereignty of the ethereal gift. The environment of the star map is a sovereignty of the cosmic alignment, showing the constellations that watch over the mortal plane. This represents the lore of the destiny, where the hero's very soul is tuned to a specific frequency of magic or power. The air of the stars is cold and eternal, representing the sovereignty of the heavens. As the mechanics fade into the background, the hero realizes that the Golden Age is a system of checks and balances. The sovereignty of the gameplay is the skeleton that holds up the flesh of the story. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the logic of the engine, and the sovereignty of the interaction is the final verdict. The math remains even when the gods fall. The lore of the world is defined by the sovereignty of the Heartland, the province of Cyrodiil itself. This is the lore of the diverse biosphere, a land that acts as a mirror of Tamriel. The environment is a display of geographical sovereignty, ranging from the snowy peaks of the Gerals to the tropical swamps of Blackwood. This represents the sovereignty of the center, as Cyrodiil touches every other province. The air varies from the thin, crisp chill of Bruma to the humid, heavy mist of Bravel. This is the lore of the environmental storytelling, where the sovereignty of the landscape tells the player exactly where they are without the need for a map. The primary environmental theme of this overview is the radiance of the imperial center. The sovereignty of the Nibene Basin is the heart of the province, a lush valley of golden wheat fields and ancient great forests. This represents the lore of the breadbasket. The environment features rolling green hills and sparkling rivers that lead to the Rumar Lake. This is the sovereignty of the lifeblood, where the water provides the sovereignty of the trade for the entire empire. The air is sweet with the scent of clover, representing the sovereignty of the imperial peace. This beauty stands in stark contrast to the scarlet skies of the Oblivion Gates that tear through the scenery. The second theme is the sovereignty of the ancient echo. Scattered across the hills are the Iliad ruins, the lore of the lost civilization. These ruins are made of luminous white stone that glows in the moonlight. This represents the sovereignty of the elven past. The environment of these ruins is a sovereignty of the geometric beauty, featuring tall spires and underground vaults. This represents the lore of the high elven architecture. The air in these ruins is electric and cold, representing the sovereignty of the residual magic. Even though the Iliads are gone, their sovereignty of the stone remains, acting as a labyrinth of the past for the modern hero to explore. The search for the sovereignty of the edge leads to the Colovian Highlands. This is the lore of the rugged West, a land of dry grass and red rock. This represents the sovereignty of the frontier. The environment is hard and unforgiving, mirroring the stone-faced people of the city of Kvatch and Anvil. The air is dusty and warm, representing the sovereignty of the resilience. This region acts as a buffer against the wilds of Hammerfell, representing the sovereignty of the shield. Ryu, or the hero, realizes that the Golden Age is held together by these vast distances, where the sovereignty of the road is the only thing connecting a farmer to his emperor. Beyond the dry west lies the sovereignty of the Gold Coast, where the city of Anvil meets the Abyssinian Sea. This represents the lore of the maritime gateway. The environment here is Mediterranean and bright, with cypress trees and white stone villas overlooking the docks. This is the sovereignty of the merchant king. The air is salty and warm, representing the sovereignty of the global trade. This is the only place in Cyrodiil where the horizon is infinite, offering a sense of hope and escape from the inland fires. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the salt of the sea, and the sovereignty of the coast is the final verdict. To the far south, the land sinks into the sovereignty of the Blackwood margin. This is the lore of the bog, where the soil turns to black mud and the trees are strangled by vines. This represents the sovereignty of the decay. The city of Leowian sits at the mouth of the Niben River, acting as a last outpost before the wild marshes of Black Marsh. The environment is oppressive and wet, with frequent rainstorms that turn the roads into rivers. This is the sovereignty of the hidden danger. The air smells of damp moss and peat, representing the sovereignty of the swamp. Here, the sovereignty of the empire feels thin and fragile against the primal power of the land. The tactical threat of the geography is the sovereignty of the wild encounter. This introduces the lore of the random predator. In the forests, the timber wolf and the land drayug represent the sovereignty of the untamed nature. The environment of the deep woods is a sovereignty of the hidden danger, where a spriggon can emerge from a tree or a will-o'-the-wisp can lead a traveler into a bog. Ryu, or the hero, must use the sovereignty of the map reading, knowing which paths are safe and which caverns are death traps. This is the sovereignty of the ranger, proving that the land itself is an enemy as much as the Daedra. The air on the Niben Bridge at sunset is quiet and eternal. The lore of the heart of the world is the title given to Cyrodiil. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the soil of the province, and the sovereignty of the hero is now the sovereignty of the explorer. The hero stands on the highest peak of the Dive Rock, looking out over the entire world spread below them. The Golden Age is a contract fulfilled in the beauty of the horizon, and the sovereignty of the land is the final verdict. The province is wide, the air is clear, and the path is yours. As the fog rolls over the great forest, the sovereignty of the atmosphere becomes a character of its own. The dynamic weather system ensures that a sunny afternoon can turn into a violent thunderstorm in seconds. This represents the lore of the living world. The environment is never static. It breathes with the hero. This represents the sovereignty of the immersion. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the rain and the sun, and the sovereignty of the atmosphere is the final verdict. The world is not just a stage. It is a presence that demands respect. The final geography is the sovereignty of the underworld, the massive sewer systems, and ancient tunnels that run beneath the cities. This is the lore of the hidden infrastructure. The environment is cramped and dark, mirroring the corruption that often hides in the hearts of the urban centers. This represents the sovereignty of the secret path. The air is stale and cold, representing the sovereignty of the urban decay. Ryu, or the hero, realizes that for every sovereign tower reaching for the sky, there is a sovereign tunnel reaching for the dark. The Golden Age is a contract signed in the stone of the underworld, and the sovereignty of the foundation is the final verdict.